Welcome to another edition of Global Conversations. My guests tonight are two friends, Vladimir Kozin and Bruce Gagnon. We are going to talk about two things tonight, two major things tonight that are hardly talked about anywhere, but they are so critical. We're going to talk about the space race. There's a race to space. And we're going to talk about the militarization of space. Mm-hmm. And nobody really is talking about this, but it has important strategic importance for Russia, the USA, China, as well as a host of other countries already in space and others who want to get there. Now, maybe some of you are not familiar with Bruce and Vladimir. So I'll give a brief introduction and then we'll get started. Vladimir has a PhD and he's a member of two prominent Russian academies. He has published 18 monographs on arms control, and he is a leading expert at the Center for Military Political Studies, Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Bruce Gagnon, well, he's a troublemaker. He's a dear friend, but he is the co-founder and the director of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. Bruce is an active member of Veterans for Peace nationally and in, well, the United States and around the world. He's even been to Russia. And Bruce is a lifetime organizer and activist. And that's why I called him a troublemaker. He's really one of the people, and I know a lot, but he's one of the people that is always out in front. He's protesting militarization. They're building Navy destroyers equipped with missiles right where he lives in Bath Iron Works, and he's there almost on a weekly basis and sometimes more often, protesting as the workers come in and out. So, welcome to the show, Bruce and Vladimir.
Thank you, Regis. Hi.
So, Bruce, I'm gonna give the first question to you, my friend. I know the answer to this, but many people don't. You have been involved in these issues for a very long time. So, when and where, Bruce, and why did you decide to co-found this international organization known as the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space?
Well, actually, I started working on space issues in 1982, but for 10 years, working at the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, I was organizing protests at the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral in Florida, where the US military launches various space technologies. And it became clear to us that the arms race in space issue was getting worse by the day. And so three of us, the Florida Coalition, and a group in Colorado where the Space Command was headquartered in Colorado Springs, and then Carl Grossman, a journalism professor from New York that was writing about these issues. We created the Global Network in 1992 because we saw that this thing was going global. The US was establishing what are called downlink stations that communicate with the military satellites and relay signals, that they're radars that are looking at Russia and China and would help in any first strike attack against Russia and China. So in all these communities around the world, there are peace groups who are saying, we don't want our country to be used as a base for this new Star Wars program. And so these people became the members, if you will, the base of the global network when we created it in 1992. And our goal is to help expand the consciousness within the peace movement and beyond about what's happening in space and the need to immediately begin to deal with it. And so this has been our work.
So, Bruce, I've been to a couple of your annual conventions. You hold them not only in the United States, but I've attended one in the one in the United States. I attended one in Japan. You're an international organization. Where else are your members located, and where have you held these annual conventions to spread the word to local populations?
Well, it's a really long list, but we met in Sweden. In fact, Vladimir Kozin came and spoke to us there that time. We met in Moscow. He came again and spoke to our group. We've met in Australia, Korea, Germany, England, throughout the United States, various locations. We always try to meet near a place where there's a major US installation that is involved in space. So many other places we've met over the years, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to have a physical meeting the last couple of years.
Yeah, I want to add that you've also been to India and Nepal.
Yeah.
And part of the agenda is always to have a protest or a demonstration outside of those military installations, correct?
That's right. In fact, I just had an email this morning from India, one of our leaders there, and told me he's collecting 500 rupees per person to sign them up as new members in the global network. So India has been a really wonderful addition to the global network.
Yeah, and sometimes some of you get arrested at some of these protests.
Yeah, that's right. I was arrested in Korea along with about 15 others from the global network when we met there on Jeju Island, where the US built a Navy base that is part of its surge, its pivot into the Asia Pacific to encircle both China and Russia. And so as they were building that Navy base, we were invited by the mayor of Gagnon village to come there, and we did for our annual conference. And on our last day, we crawled under the fence, the barbed wire fence that was blocking the sacred Gurumbi rock, where they were going to blast it and create the piers for this Navy base. So we were arrested and taken to jail.
Well, one of the important things that I have always pointed out, and I'm going to point out now, there's a lot of people that talk the talk, but there are not many like Bruce and the members of his organization that walk the talk, even to the extent of putting their own personal lives at risk and getting arrested around the world. I've always felt that you've been, and the global network has been, a model for how other activists need to get out into the streets, boots on the ground, and blow their horn. So
actually, we're going to Bath Iron Works tomorrow, Saturday, for a major protest. And there'll be people coming from around the state to join that protest.
Yeah. Anyway, kudos to you, Bruce. Vladimir.
Yes.
You have been advising the experts and the government in Moscow for quite a long time on nuclear treaties with the United States, nuclear weapons, and military warfare. Now, how long have you been advising, say, the government of Russia and these other experts who are policy people? And tell me about that work. What does it involve?
Okay, Regis, yeah. I joined the Soviet Ministry for Foreign Affairs in 1972 and have been immediately sent to Afghanistan because at the Institute I studied two Afghan native languages, Pashto and Dari, just a kind of variant of Farsi. At the end of 70s, I returned from Kabul, and a friend of mine suggested that I should join a postgraduate course at the Diplomatic Academy, also in the framework of the Soviet Foreign Ministry. And I did. I was enrolled and studied there. Soon after I finished this postgraduate course, I joined the Arms Control Department at the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 1991, I joined the Russian diplomatic service, a kind of Republican Ministry for Foreign Affairs, when the Soviet Union that time existed as well. But in 1991, after abortive coup, we became the masters of ceremonies. And I was again posted to the Arms Control Department, now of the Russian Federation Foreign Ministry. And there I began studying arms control issues, especially nuclear forces and space-based weapons as well. During that time, my first written report was immunity of satellites, of the United States of America and the Russian Federation. But immunity only a specific cluster of satellites. Immunity of piloted space stations, immunity of military Sputniks or satellites, which do not have striking capabilities, but are innocent in terms of functioning, navigational, meteorological, then traffic, etc., GPS system, etc., etc. It was in the year 2000 exactly, and I published this kind of personal, private draft treaty on immunity of satellites in the Russian independent gazette called Независимая газета. So a lot of time has passed since then, and I managed to write articles on arms control and disarmament, nuclear and space, banning space militarization, and creating it as an inheritance of the entire population of the globe, of our mankind. So recently, I contributed several monographs on my own. One is called The U.S. Military Space Policy, Key Guidelines and Future Capabilities. It was released in Moscow in 2019. It has more than 300 pages, published in English. Second book, dealing specifically with outer space. I'm not talking about nuclear weapons, it's another story, but concentrating due to the subject we are talking about on space. Another recently released monograph having nearly 400 pages appeared here in Moscow in Russian and in English in a separate volume. English title is U.S. Key Military Strategies, Their National and Global Consequences, sorry. And the most recent, the last one from this space series is the book called The U.S. Space Force, Its Key Tasks and Future Capabilities. It will be released very soon in Moscow in English and in Russian. Russian version will appear, let's hope, in upcoming February, if nothing prevents. And English, the same, but a little bit larger than Russian book, will have more than 420 pages, will appear, let's say, in April or May this year. So they're quite a big volume. And in these books, latest books, I tried to compare the US space policy and the Soviet Russian space policy. What are the differences? And what are the stumbling blocks of blocking militarization of space? Also just examined various initiatives aimed at banning the use of space for placement of strike weapons like anti-satellite and space-to-space assets as well. So, Regis, that's all from my side concerning my introduction.
Well, Bruce is going to want a copy of that book on the United States Space Force. That's one of his his one of his prime focuses of emphasis.
Yes, it is possible, Regis. It is possible when it is released from the publishing house, no problem. I can send by normal postal service, not DHL.
And you should charge what all these academic publishing houses charge is like $150 for the book. Ordinary people can't afford to read those.
Discount from my side because Bruce is a friend of mine. And I'm happy that he recalled our first encounter, first meeting in Sweden a long time ago.
So, Vladimir, a couple of follow-up questions. Have you been involved in any of the nuclear treaties, the development or the negotiations?
Yes. Oh, yes. I drafted even the treaty on proclaiming the Baltic Sea area as a NFZ, as a nuclear-free zone, and on turning the Indian Ocean into a zone of peace with non-nuclear provisions, and also participated in extension of the latest treaty, called in English the New Start, in Russian Start 3, extended till 2026. Yes.
So I have referred to you in the past, and I know now you're retired, but I've referred to you as a special assistant to the Russian presidential administration. Was I in error, or was that accurate?
But being a civil servant and in the Soviet and later Russian foreign ministry, yes, I consider myself as a helper, and not so big, not so a boss, but as a helper, as a minor helper. Yeah, because I'm too critical to what is going on, and that's why I was very frank and never hide myself from telling truth to the government, and especially in the INF treaty issue, etc. And there is a book concerning the INF treaty written by myself and widely circulated. I circulated with the presidential administration, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Presidential Library, etc., etc.
Okay, so we've established the credentials of both of you as experts, one from America and one from Russia. I've had both of you on the show many times talking about some of these issues. And Vladimir, I want to congratulate you. You not only spoke directly and honestly and unabashedly on my show to American and Western viewers on every continent. And I really thank you. And I know a lot of people do. They become very fond of our shows that we've done. Now, Bruce,
my pleasure, Regis. My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure having both of you, really, not only on the show, but as friends. Now, I want to clarify two terms. Bruce, I'm going to start with you. And then Vladimir, you can see what you might add to that. So, Bruce, are the space race and the militarization of space the same thing, or are they different?
Well, I think they're the same and different. The militarization of space means the placement of military warfighting, reconnaissance, surveillance, targeting satellites, but also you then move into the weaponization of space, where the United States and other countries begin to look at actually putting weapons in space. And then beyond that, I think the space race brings in a whole new issue that very few talk about these days, and that's the mining the sky. We now see that there are very rich fat cats that are wanting to go out into space and make land claims on various planetary bodies that really violates the United Nations outer space and moon treaties that said the heavenly bodies are the province of all humankind, and that no country, no corporation, no individual can claim them. But when Obama was president, he signed a new law giving American corporations the right to go out and make land claims on some of these celestial bodies. So I think we're going to see a lot of tension in the years ahead over bases on the moon, mining on the moon, and other mining on other planetary bodies. And I remember a book published by the Congress of the United States, a congressional study in 1989. It was called Military Space Forces, the Next 50 Years. And in that book, the staffer, the congressional staffer, wrote that with US armed space stations on either side of what he called the L4 and L5 quadrants in space, that the US would be able to control the pathway on and off the planet Earth to determine who could actually go out and mine the sky in the future. And he said, and this is a quote from the book, that with our armed forces laying in wait at that location, we could hijack rival shipments upon return. Well, this is like piracy, right? And so the United States has been heading in this direction to want to put in place military technologies to control not only the Earth below. This is where the word full spectrum dominance comes in. That means control the Earth, control the ground with the Army, control the seas with the Navy, control the air above the Earth with the Air Force, but also control space itself now with this Space Force. So this is the real danger zone that we're moving into today. And I have to remind people that you have to say, where did this vision, where did this idea come from of US being essentially the master of space? And it came from Major General Walter Dornberger, who was Adolf Hitler's head of the V1 and V2 rocket program. And below him was Werner von Braun and his rocket team building the rockets. And after the war was over, the US smuggled 1,500 former Nazis into this country to seed the military-industrial complex. And Major General Walter Dornberger testified before the Congress in the 1950s, saying, "Gentlemen, I didn't come to this country to lose the Third World War. I lost two already." And he laid out this vision of orbiting battle stations. And so today, when we hear this slogan from the Pentagon, master of space, that the US will be the master of space, I wonder what's the difference between that and the German slogan, Deutschland über alles? Was there an ideological contamination that came when the United States brought 1,500 Nazis into this country, seeded the CIA with them, seeded the military-industrial complex with them, and seeded the the Pentagon with them? I think there was an ideological contamination.
Well, two parts to this. Isn't this the epitome of arrogance? On the one hand, that the United States can think that it can dominate and control space. But on the other hand, when you think about how arrogant it is for Earthlings, and we represent a planet that's just this tiny little dot in the entire solar system, and to think that we have some kind of ownership over it, that's almost as bad as the arrogance that comes from the Western interpretation of the creation in the book of Genesis, first chapter, that God supposedly put man in control of all of nature. Anyway, thank you for pointing out what you did, because I know you've been saying it for a long time. We've said it together, and you've said it in a couple of my films, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit later. But Vladimir, for you, what do these terms mean? Space race and the militarization of space.
Regis, I think that militarization of space is a kind of preface, is a kind of a first step leading to space arms race. Because militarization means placement of different kind of weapons and using hostile acts, hostile behavior in terms of other countries' satellites and space stations and Sputniks, etc., etc. Not necessarily by knocking exactly physically by physical impact, but also by using electronic devices like jamming, like blocking electronic brains of the satellite, etc. Even docking to the hostile satellite, capturing it and putting it in the distant corner of the universe where it cannot be found completely by the owner. So different type of techniques. At least there are 24 of hostile acts that can be used due to contemporary technologies in outer space. So if the level of militarization of outer space or space is reached, it could trigger space arms race, a kind of competition, a kind of rivalry between militarily space-faring nations. There are not too many countries in the world that can militarize space, especially in terms of putting into orbits space-based striking systems or having space ground-based systems that can knock down and destroy satellites flying above 100 kilometers over the world oceans. That's the lower frontier, the lower border of space. 100 kilometers and more, that's space. Below 100 kilometers, that's stratosphere and lower atmosphere. So militarization of space and subsequent product, its subsequent product like arms race in space currently is acquiring momentum. And unfortunately, several days ago, exactly on the 17th of January this year, NATO stamped NATO's overarching space policy that for the first time declared that space is operational domain, and I interpret this operational domain as a war-fighting domain. That also stressed this space policy of NATO, also stressed the integration of space into NATO's overall deterrence policy, while deterrence we interpret in Russian as a kind of intimidation, containment through intimidation. And the most important thing that all kind of attacks from the ground, from the earth into space, within space domain, and from space going down to the earth is considered as a major challenge to the security of the transatlantic alliance. And in these circumstances, such attacks could lead to the invocation of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty on the creation of NATO alliance, in 1949. So Article 5, I would like to remind, has the provision one for all for one. So it's for the first time that NATO alliance made a political policy, a political strategy, where Article 5 has been specifically mentioned and can be used, adding 4 other domains that can be used in military terms: land, sea, airspace, cyberspace, plus the new one, 5th, space domain. It's very dangerous, and I think that since that time, it's a kind of watershed of the space policy of the United States and NATO, because the USA is the #1 wireling in the NATO alliance. So militarization of space started a long time ago. The arms race started from that very moment, January 17th. That's my personal judgment and personal impression, because we have to divide two processes: militarization of space and arms race in space. Regis?
So, Vladimir, I have to ask you a very pointed question. Bruce talked about the arrogance of the United States military, and specifically, I guess, the Space Force, who called themselves masters of space, going to deny everybody else access to space. Has Russia ever developed such an arrogant policy to state that?
No, we are not for dominating in space, for domination, our domination in space, or domination of our allies in space. Look, when the space era has started in 1957, when the first Soviet Sputnik, first man-made moon was launched into space, a very small ball, just reminding the football. Yes. We tabled too many proposals at the international arena, and they are known to the general public in the Soviet era, then afterwards during the Republican period of the Russian Federation. And I enumerated that there are 20 international initiatives to make space as a domain to be used by all countries, as the heritage of the whole mankind. So it should be used exclusively for peaceful purposes, and military use of space can be done by the right of any capable nations to launch non-combat, non-striking satellites and assets. As I said earlier, navigational, meteorological, traffic, just assessing crops on the ground on the earth, then various traffic movements in the world oceans, etc., etc. So it should be permitted. And there should be permitted, I think, the second cluster of actions of the globe, of our population on the earth. I mean, somehow to destroying space junks or space debris. We are having too many debris after knocking down our own national satellites and space stations, and there are Sputniks or satellites that have not been destroyed, but they are not functioning. They became redundant, but nevertheless, they create a kind of traffic congestion in space. It's very dangerous, even without proclaiming war. This kind of debris of, let's say, 10 centimeters in diameter can just knock any mere international piloted space stations inhabited by Russians, Americans, and Japanese, etc., many nations from many countries, and can deliver damage, very harmful, very risky. So I don't know how to resolve this issue, but this is very important, as well as not to give a chance arms race to be deeply rooted in the space orbits around the world, around the globe.
Could I comment on that? Could I comment on that space junk issue? In 1989, we organized a protest at the Kennedy Space Center against the militarization of space. And Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, one of the early moonwalkers, came and spoke. And he said that if we have one war in space, it will be the one and only, because we will create so much space debris, as you were just describing, Vladimir, that will be entombed to the planet below. We won't be able to get a rocket through the minefield that would encircle the Earth. But one of the problems today is we see the United States allowing the launching of tens of thousands of mini satellites for 5G by Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and other private, guys. And the parking lots around the Earth are getting so crowded and so full that it might not be a war in space that creates this cascading situation, that it very well might be just the increasingly crowded orbits where things begin to crash into each other. And when that happens, think about it. Right now, we're able to speak to each other because of satellite technology. Well, the Earth will go dark if this cascading situation happens. Cell phones, cable TV, internet banking, air traffic control, weather prediction. I mean, everything we do practically, GPS on the Earth is coordinated and directed by satellites. So we've got to begin to be a little more smart about what we allow to be launched up there, because it's getting to be a real mess.
Bruce and Regis, may I add to what Bruce have said?
Of course, it's your show.
Concerning numbers of these particles, of these splinters of in the form of debris, in the form of junk. That's correct that our space forces also monitor these kind of things orbiting the Earth. But I have not come across any exact figures, how many just pieces of debris are flying, are just moving around the globe. But I have recently came across National Aeronautics and Space Administration of the United States, and it said that totally there are 100 million of different sizes of space debris just moving around. And the Pentagon of the Department of Defense of the United States is able to monitor only 23,000 of such debris, only that are having the size of 10 centimeters and more. That's not sufficient. That's why international cooperation, first in monitoring this kind of junk, space junk, and somehow to clean the space out of this, garbage, so to say. Yes, Regis?
I have two thoughts to add on this. Number one, we've done a damn good job of contaminating Mother Earth as it is, that we're in danger of not being able to sustain life here for a whole lot longer. Excuse me. And now we're doing the same thing to space. I mean, when you talk about insanity, when you talk about some kind of contamination of humanity, it is showing itself now really in full color to everybody in the world if they were only watching and listening. So, Bruce, in my film, The Ghost of Jeju, you spoke very clearly about several things. One was full spectrum dominance. And I want you to talk a little bit more about the United States Space Force, calling themselves masters of space. And one of the things in that movie came from a film you made with a Canadian. I forget the name of it, but it shows these people from the Pentagon, generals, talking about how cool it is to have missiles that can destroy our enemies and have listening stations that we can spy on everybody around the world, and how cool that is. And it was terrifying and horrifying to hear that. Comment a little bit more on that that American, I think it's a doctrine. It sounds like it's a doctrine. It's been accepted to become the masters of space. And what do they intend to do there beyond just blocking others' access? You introduced me to some weapons that absolutely terrified me. And one of them was the rods of God. Bruce, take it away.
Well, it is part of this idea of American exceptionalism that we're the Christian do-gooders and we're going to spread freedom all over the world. And now we're going to spread freedom into space, but we have to control space in order to keep the bad guys, the dark forces, away when necessary, like Russia and China or Iran or North Korea. So this is a really, I think, deep sickness that America has, especially in the inside of the military industrial complex. I want to give one example of something that's happening today with US missiles that is really dangerous and could trigger World War III with Russia. United States has built in Romania and Poland 2 missile launching facilities that they call Aegis Ashore. Now, Aegis is a program on board the Navy destroyers that are made here where I live in Bath, Maine. They have interceptor missiles that their job is under missile defense is to be the shield after a US first strike attack on Russia or China. When they try to launch their remaining retaliatory capability, it is this missile defense shield would be used to pick off, knock out any retaliatory capability, giving the US a quote unquote successful first strike attack. So in Romania and Poland, the US has built 2 of these missile defense facilities. In addition, though, to being able to fire these so-called interceptor missiles, they can also fire first strike attack Tomahawk cruise missiles from these same platforms. Just like on the Navy ships, they can fire either one of these missiles. So they can be both quote unquote defensive platforms, but also offensive platforms. So when Russia looks at what has essentially become a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse, with US deployments in Poland and Romania, where they can fire missiles into Russia in a short period of time. This is really, really dangerous. And this is what the United States is doing. In addition, the US has a new technology called the military space plane, the X-37. And it's shown, it's like a super drone. It's shown that it can stay in orbit. It's a pilotless plane. It looks like the space shuttle, except it's a smaller version, but it can stay in orbit for a whole year at a time. And it has these bay doors where it can open these bay doors and it can release various things. And I read one Russian expert say that they fear that this plane could in fact deliver nuclear weapons from space down to the earth below as part of this first strike attack strategy against Russia or China. And I can confirm that this is part of the program because years ago, I read a report in the aerospace magazine called Aviation Week and Space Technology. They reported on a computer war game at the Space Command, where the US launched a first strike attack against Russia and China. And after that first strike attack, the missile defense systems were used. But as part of that first strike attack, the military space plane, the X-37, was used in that war game. So clearly Russia is seeing, and China are seeing these threats coming at them from space and also from places like Romania and Poland, where these installations have been built. So the US has a very aggressive and provocative strategy when it comes to space as part of its first strike attack program, something that the US refuses to renounce, a first strike attack. So the American people know virtually nothing about any of this at all.
Vladimir, I know you're going to want to respond.
Yeah, I would like to respond. Well, thank you very much, Bruce. You touched very delicate issues in American-Russian relationship concerning missile defense systems. Correct. The operational missile defense base is operational. It's working. It has been enacted in 2016. It has 24 launchers, launching tubes that can house, right you are, defensive weapon interceptors, plus offensive weapon in terms of land-based Tomahawk that can be either conventional or nuclear tipped. And in the future, they can house hypersonic missiles as well. As to Poland, it's nearly completion. It's not completed. It's not in active service, but it has also 24 tubes. So altogether, 48. People might say that that's not too much. Probably they are right, but at the same time, the US Navy will soon have around 96 ships capable to deliver interceptors, then cruise missiles and underwater rockets, and anti-aircraft missiles as well. So it's a kind of combination, a kind of unique canister that can be used for launching various types of rockets and missiles. So 96. And there are two types of ships, combat ships in the US Navy that are Aegis capable. Aegis, by the way, it's like a shield from the Greek myths. Two types of combat ships. One is Earlyberg destroyer, guided missile destroyer, and the second guided missile cruiser of Ticonderoga class. So they can move all around the world in the world oceans absolutely free outside the territorial waters of many littoral states. It's not a problem. So, and they have been used, I mean, the interceptor missile was used by guided missile cruiser Lake Erie. By a single shot, it knocked down the functional American satellite at the height of 247 kilometers above the world oceans, quite successfully by a single shot. So as to X-37 Bravo, autonomous vehicle, not piloted, like a mini shuttle, the Americans have launched the 6 of them, and the previous called OTV-05 or USA 277 designation just was in the orbit for 780 days and nights, quite too long. And the sixth one, OTV-06, is still flying, and I don't know when it comes back. So the person Bruce has mentioned was the Director General of the famous Russian military production company called Almaz Antey, who produces the famous anti-aircraft, anti-defense system called S-400, 500, and newly built 550. So he said, Mr. Yan Novikov, he said publicly that this platform called X-37B or Bravo can house 6 nuclear charges in the cargo bay that can be used anytime because it's rotating many hundred days and nights in the orbit. Another thing is that in October 21st and 22nd, the Russian national space monitoring centers have spotted unusual movement from the X-37B. The cargo bay was opened and a specially fast-moving device has been released and flew very quickly from this non-piloted spacecraft. What was that? Americans never explained to us. And we are suspicious that this is anti-satellite weapons, space-based strike weapons based in space, not on the ground, not on the world, not at the world oceans. So that's very suspicious. And unfortunately, the situation is very dangerous, is very confrontational between Washington and Moscow over the reasons and over the grounds that can be resolved or removed very easily, provided there is a good faith, a good mood to resolve these controversial issues. But today I have January the 21st, I have watched 2 press conferences and the talks between our Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and American State Secretary. Is the same title as American Ministry of Foreign Affairs or State Secretary, Mr. Antony Blinken. They again reached no solutions. And I'm afraid that the space domain is out of sight during this conversation because the main idea is to block further expansion of NATO to the eastern direction, and the second is to not to start a war by Ukraine against Donbass and some other issues like not providing Kyiv with contemporary weaponry prohibited by the OSCE Code of Conduct, I mean the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. In 1993, it blocked by its decision the right of any nation to deliver lethal weapons to areas where there are conflicts and military engagements between several state entities, etc., etc. So too many problems, too many issues. Wow, I don't know how to resolve them.
Well, I want to, we're going to conclude on this because we're coming up close to an hour. I want to connect 3 dots, which I think need to be connected. Everybody's attention right now, we're on Lavrov and Blinken, we're on Russia and United States, Wendy Sherman talking in Geneva on the 17th about this crisis in Ukraine, and it's getting worse every day. America continues to increase the aggressive pressure on Russia in Moscow, sending in more troops. So here we have this imminent danger right now on the planet. And that what nobody else is talking about is this imminent danger, maybe more imminent, that satellites could crash or somebody could trigger something in space. And as Bruce said, the world would go dark. That's two dots. The third dot, I think we have to talk about China, because the United States not only is acting aggressively towards Russia, as we speak, it's acting just as aggressively towards China over not only Taiwan, but over who's going to be the next hegemon. I'd like each of you, in conclusion, to share your thoughts on this triad that is really threatening existence here on this planet. Bruce, take it first, and then we'll conclude with Vladimir.
Yes.
Well, we know that Russia and China have been moving towards, and I believe they've signed or will soon sign, a military alliance to essentially recognizes that if the United States attacks and takes down either country, then the other won't last very long either. The United States now sees, and I think the West now sees, that their moment in history is fading, where they were going to dominate the planet. And Russia and China and other countries creating this multipolar world where more countries are involved in creating peace and prosperity around the world. The United States is not happy about that. And so Russia and China have become the number one enemies that must be taken down. This creates this dangerous moment we're in today. At the same time, I think there's something else that often goes unspoken. The Rand Corporation, that was famous for the Pentagon Papers, has a study out called The Unbalancing of Russia. And they're really all about trying to break Russia into smaller countries, balkanize Russia, like was done to Yugoslavia during the Clinton administration when they attacked Yugoslavia and broke it up. And I think the reason for this is climate change, the melting of the Arctic ice. And Russia has the world's largest border with the Arctic Sea. And they will have greater access to the resources that become available after this melting of the ice. And so the West is not happy about that. They want control of that region. And they're now moving to, I think, try to break Russia up, unbalance it, make it spend more on its military, create more chaos on its borders. This is the strategy that the Rand Corporation calls for. And so this is a very, again, provocative, aggressive, dangerous move by the United States and NATO.
Vladimir, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we all, not only we as three gentlemen, but the entire planet is unfortunately living in such a very dramatic and very dangerous situation. We have three types of arms races. The first one, nuclear arms race, inherited from the past. Contemporary arms race, missile defense arms race. And the third arms race, it's a space arms race. Too heavy for the citizens of the world. The burden is tremendous. So we have to resolve all these issues, not one by one, but immediately, together, at one session of negotiations, but not like we are just having the United States and NATO have displayed during recent talks called in Russian triathlon, compared with biathlon called triathlon because of three zones, three capitals of the meeting between the United States, NATO, and later on with the OSCE. As to the People's Republic China, we, the Russian Federation, we are having special strategic relationship, not military union so far, but it looks like a military union without its formalization, because we decided not to attack each other by using nuclear forces, so actually committed to no first use and no first strike at all. Second, we began computerized exercises testing our missile defense systems to national, and recently started sorties of our strategic heavy bombers certified as nuclear carriers, as nuclear delivery systems. And we have been supported by Beijing during this crisis, invented by Ukraine and pushed and supported by Washington, especially by this current administration. And to de-escalate the situation in this part of Europe, where Ukraine and Donbass are located, the first thing to do is commitment of Washington not to sell arms to Kiev neo-Nazi ultranational regime, as well as commitment from other countries, from UK, from Czech Republic, from Poland, from three Baltic republics, and even from neutral Sweden. It's also selling military hardware to the Kiev regime. Second, Kiev should withdraw all its troops from Ukrainian Belarusian border, from Ukrainian Russian border, and from Ukrainian Donbass border, and sign politically and legally binding treaty with Donbass, pledging not to attack this kind of land where there are 800 Russian citizens, the holder of Russian passports, or Russian ethnic Russians, who do not want to live in the house called Ukraine, ultra-nationalist Ukraine.
You said
so only by this we can diffuse the controversial and very dangerous situation, not always putting just one question during the talks. Russian troops should go to Vladivostok, Horizons from this border. Thank
Vladimir.
you. Bruce, go ahead.
You said 800 Russian
800,000.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, for 800,000 people, nearly 1 million.
Yeah.
So I want to thank the both of you for this very in-depth and enlightening and frightening discussion. We're in a world of hurt as a race, as humans, with the threat of imminent war, not only on the ground, but in space. We have three superpowers, Russia, China, and the United States, with really Russia and China now aligned. As President Xi said, what we have is even more than an alliance. It's 2 against 1.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I find not just insane, but I find it evil, is that Washington and those people at the Rand Corporation, those people who are in these policy institutes, the people that are in the Pentagon, cannot see that. It is not just insanity. I really believe that it's evil. We're going to have to continue this discussion because there's so much more to discuss that we only scratched the surface tonight. And so we'll do this again real soon. Thank you both again, and peace to you and to all people on planet Earth.
Well, Regis, thank you very much. And Bruce, thank you very much. Take care. Feel yourself committed, motivated, and strong as you are always have been, and you will be in the future as well. Goodbye. Cheers. Have a nice evening or daylight. I don't know what time is it now exactly in the USA, or in Crimea it is the same, right? So goodbye, and thank you for your questions and your just cooperation in debating these very important issues.